Please welcome Chief Research Officer with Secure, Mikko Huuppinen.
Good morning, RSA Conference. My name is Mikko, and I work at WithSecure, and recently one of our younger employees came to me to ask me that, hey Mikko, you're a global cybersecurity expert. How do you become a cybersecurity expert? And I told him that it's simple. You just pick a field and then you work in the field forever. And eventually everybody will assume that you're an expert because you've been around forever. And that's what I've done. I studied reverse engineering early viruses in the beginning of my career, around 1991. And back then, those early viruses were spreading under MS-DOS, and they looked like this, or maybe like this, or maybe like this. Early viruses, legalized cannabis virus was from the Netherlands, as you would guess, but the rest of them are actually Russian. I live 2 hours away from the Russian border, and I spent a lot of the early part of my career analyzing various floppy-based viruses coming out of Russia and spreading around the world. And early on, I realized that there were so few viruses, I could actually collect all of the viruses, all of the worms, all of the Trojans in existence and analyze all of them. So that's what I did. There were around 250 of them at the time. And one of the early viruses, which had already been spreading before I started my career, was this. This is AIDS Information Trojan from 1989, 2 years before I started my professional career. And this is the world's first ransom Trojan. Pay attention, this is 1989, not 1999. This is ancient, this is a complete outlier. This particular ransomware was sent to people in mail on floppy disks. In fact, it was sent to the participants of a conference on HIV research. And I actually have a copy of this one with me right here. Well, I don't know who deserves the claps, but I suppose it might be the person who came up with this, early cyber criminal, a US citizen, actually a professor, came up with this idea that he would write an HIV information program which would educate about AIDS and HIV, and it would include a license agreement which says that you have to pay for the software, and if you don't pay, they can use any means necessary to make you pay. That's what it says in the license agreement. So if you install this software on your MS-DOS computer and you reboot it 90 times, it would encrypt your hard drive and then show you a ransom note. Pretty much like, ransomware today. And this is 1989. Well, then it took quite a while until we started seeing more modern ransomware. But the basic idea persisted. Ransomware would infect your system, encrypt your files, and ask you to pay a ransom. And since we are at the RSA conference, which has its roots in encryption, I guess one of the points we should realize is that this is a problem caused by strong encryption. All technological innovations have an upside and a downside. Strong encryption is great. We all love strong encryption, uncrackable encryption algorithms, which provide us with great security and great privacy. But it also enables bad things. It means that evil people, criminals, terrorists can communicate without law enforcement or authorities or intelligence agencies being able to see what they do. It also means that a problem like ransomware could become a problem, that bad people can encrypt your files and you cannot recover the files because you can't crack the encryption. So all innovations bring us upsides and downsides. It's always a trade-off. Next up, we ran into a series of ransomware which wouldn't work like the ransomware we see today. This is Reveton. This is around 2012 and 2013. We called these the police Trojans. They would infect your system at the time, for example, through flash exploits as you were browsing the web, And then they would lock your system and claim that it was locked by the law enforcement. And now you would have to pay a fine. And the reason why your computer is locked is that you did something illegal. There's pirated movies on your hard drive, for example. This was a fairly big problem, but it had one shortcoming from the point of view of the criminals, and that was the payment mechanism. This all changed in 2013. This is CryptoLocker, the first ransomware in history which was using cryptocurrencies for the payment. Cryptocurrencies, currencies like Bitcoin. In fact, almost all of the ransomware Trojans use Bitcoins. We have seen a couple using Monero and things like that, but Bitcoin was the game changer. And once again, this is an example of a technical innovation which brings us upsides and downsides. Cryptocurrencies are the equivalent of cash online. Real-world criminals love cash. Online criminals love cryptocurrencies for the very same reasons. And it was much easier for criminals to hide the money movements when the movements were in blockchain. Before this, the earlier ransomware were trying to use things like virtual credit cards or prepaid cards or other payment systems, which were fairly easy to track. How was CryptoLocker distributed? Interestingly enough, it was distributed originally through an existing botnet, the Zeus botnet, which had been around already for several years by this time. Zeus, developed and run by Yevgeny Bogachev, one of the Russian cybercriminals who is still wanted today, whose whereabouts are unknown still today. The brain behind Zeus, towards the end of the Zeus botnet lifetime, changed the tactic from spreading banking Trojans into spreading the first Bitcoin-enabled ransomware. Very quickly, we saw other spreading mechanisms, including spreading CryptoLocker in email attachments, and then we started seeing copycats like CryptoWall, CTP Locker, and ZeroLocker. This is now 2014, and Loki. And the interesting thing here is that the victims of these attacks were consumers. Early ransomware was only targeting home computers. Early ransomware was only going after consumers. What early ransomware was encrypting was typically your photos. That's what was happening. Your home computer gets infected by ransomware, like CryptoLocker. It encrypts your emails and your photos, and then it asks you to pay $200. This is a completely different problem from today. The basic working mechanism is exactly the same. But the targets were not corporate targets, not enterprises. They were home users. Clearly, infecting home users is much easier than infecting well-protected corporate networks. But you couldn't ask for very large ransom payments. People couldn't pay. And my favorite example of the payment tricks that the criminals were using around this time is the infamous Popcorn ransomware. Now, Popcorn would infect your home computer. Then it would show you the ransom note. I've encrypted your photos and your emails and your archives. Please pay me 1 Bitcoin. And in one Bitcoin at the time was around $400 or somewhere there. And now if you didn't have $400, if you couldn't pay the ransom, it would give you an alternative way of paying. It would give you a unique URL, an address, and it encouraged you to post that address, for example, to your social media, because that address, anybody who would visit that address with their Windows computer would get infected as well. And if you infect 2 other victims and they pay the ransom, then Popcorn will open up your files for free. And this is brilliant. Like, you have to respect the creativity of the criminals. Like, who thought of this? This is sort of like joining a ransomware with a chain letter. Every victim infects 2 more victims, and they infect 2 more victims, they infect 2 more victims. Very clever. And around this time, we also found a ransomware called Petya. And I know what you're thinking, but this is not the infamous case which went around the world a year later. Petya was a traditional ransomware run by a criminal gang operating, once again, from Russia, which took all of the phrases and names from the James Bond GoldenEye movie. Things like Janus and Petya and Misha. Petya and Misha are satellites in the movie. The evil organization that James Bond is fighting is called Janus. This was a low-level ransomware, which actually overwrites your MBR on your Windows computers, prevent the machine from booting at all, and it would show you a ransom note from the master boot record. And this is right around the time when the shift really started from consumers into corporate attacks. The attackers, the criminals, realized that there's much more money to be made by targeting bigger targets. It's much harder, but it's much more lucrative. And this started what I call the age of the cybercrime unicorn. We all know the term unicorn startups, typically technology startups which are valued to be worth over $1 billion. Well, if you look at the revenue, if you look at the profit, if you look at the wealth controlled by some of the largest ransomware gangs today, if they would be companies with those numbers, they would definitely be considered to be unicorns. So that's the way we should think about the largest ransomware gangs. They are powerful. They are wealthy. Now, of course, they will never be doing an IPO, so they're not real unicorns, but you get the idea. And one of the reasons why they've become so powerful and wealthy is cryptocurrencies, especially the fact that when valuation of Bitcoin rises, normal people sell their Bitcoins. Criminals don't. Criminals pretty much keep their wealth in Bitcoin because they know the wealth is safe as long as it's in Bitcoin or in Monero or in Zcash or in ETH or some other cryptocurrency. They believe it's safer there, and that's true. It is safer in cryptocurrencies than in real-world currencies, which means they hold. They've kept their Bitcoins for years and years. Some of the gangs that are still operating today had 10,000 Bitcoins 5 years ago. They still have them today. And of course, the valuation has skyrocketed during these years. So some of these gangs have become very wealthy almost automatically. Also, the money these gangs make have been raising every year. There's actually, if you look at the percentage of victims today that pay the ransom, it's actually going down, but there's more and more victims. So they are making more and more money. And also, criminals have an added benefit, which is that criminals don't pay tax. I don't know if you realize this, but criminals don't need to pay tax. So these gangs become almost too wealthy automatically. So when we look at the actors that have been playing in the area of corporate ransomware, there's many familiar names. Of course, Lockbit, which right now is in the headlines, or Alpha, Clop, Akira, Blackpasta, Play, Quantum. In fact, at some stage, we tried to create a map of the relationships of different ransomware gangs and the different ransomware families, sort of like a subway map for ransomware. And it became so large, I couldn't fit it on a single slide anymore. And one thing I find especially fascinating about ransomware gangs is branding. These gangs are building a brand for themselves. They all have names, they have logos, they have websites. They're doing branding. They're trying to build a name for themselves, which might sound a little bit weird, like organized crime gangs building a brand for themselves. But then again, if you think about it, if you forget online crime gangs and think about organized crime in general, one of the strongest brands in the world is Hell's Angels, right? So real-world organized crime has been doing branding forever. Organized crime needs a strong and scary brand. Think Hell's Angels, Bandidos, Los Zetas, Yakuza, MS-13, Triad. These are big, very well-known, scary brands. And this is exactly what these ransomware gangs are trying to do. Build a strong, worldwide known, scary brand. You can imagine getting to the office Monday morning to realize that, oh my God, we've been hit by ransomware. And then, oh my God, it's Lockbit. Oh my God, it's Akira. Oh my God, it's play. Because we know these gangs by reputation. And the reputation is scary. You know that it's serious. You know that these gangs have been successfully in this business for years and years. You know they've done their homework. You know that they use proper encryption algorithms. You know that if you don't pay the ransom, you will not get the files back. You know that they've done every move they can to destroy your backups and your shadow copies. You know that if you don't pay, they will post the files they stole from you on their leak site, including your emails and patent applications and document archives and databases. But you also know, because these gangs have a strong brand, you also know that if you pay, they will deliver. They will do their best to fulfill their promises. They pretty much have to. If gangs don't deliver what they promise, the word will go around very quickly, and soon enough nobody will pay. So these criminal gangs try to build a reputation that they are criminals, but they are honest criminals. They are criminals you can work with. In fact, if you speak to earlier victims of the gang that happened to hit you, and many of the victims do, they find support from companies which were hit earlier by the same gang. Like, what happened? How did it go down? How did you recover? And the victims which have paid the ransom will tell the story that, yeah, we were hit, they destroyed our backups, we couldn't take the risk of leaking our files, so we paid the ransom. And then they provided us with the tools, and we got our files back. One of our servers was corrupted, we couldn't recover that, but the tech support team of the criminals helped us. And then we got the files back. 5 out of 5 would recommend. That's the kind of reputation they hope to build. It doesn't always work this easy. It doesn't always work like it does in the movies. But this is the basic idea. They're trying to build a reputation that's very scary, but it's also like honest. That, you know, if you pay, you will get the files back. It's also interesting about the branding that if you, for example, think these real-world crime gangs, people take Hells Angels tattoos. Well, people also take tattoos for the ransomware gangs, which might seem a bit weird, but I think it's a good example of the power of the brand. So the biggest hit these ransomware gangs ever took, in the sense of the power of their brand, happened in 2017, in May and June in 2017. Because in May and June, we saw 2 of the largest ransomware cases in history. First, WannaCry, and then NotPetya. This is a video showing how WannaCry spread around the world. And WannaCry and NotPetya are complete outliers in almost every way. WannaCry is highly unusual for the fact that this was a worm. Normal ransomware hits your system, and that's it. It's a way in. It doesn't spread further. This is, I mean, if you think about old school email worms and web worms, that's not how ransomware typically spreads. But WannaCry did. WannaCry would spread further from the infected machines using an exploit. Another thing which made WannaCry highly unusual was, well...
Now back to the major cyber attack, the ransomware crippling 200,000 computers in 150 countries.
The scale. It went around the world infecting hundreds of thousands of computers in the matter of hours because it was a worm. And when you got hit by WannaCry, well, it started encrypting your files, it changed the wallpaper on your system, it changed the extension on all your files. That's what it looked like. And this screen, this WannaCry ransom note was seen around the world in hundreds of thousands of computers. Roughly 300,000 computers in 150 countries got infected within hours. Why was it so successful? Because it was using an SMB exploit developed by National Security Agency, stolen from National Security Agency, and then the exploit found its way in the hands of Russian governmental hackers who eventually leaked it. And then it found its way to WannaCry. And this display, this WannaCry ransom note, was seen around the world. That's an information kiosk in some mall in Singapore. That's a fuel pump in Shanghai. This is an ad display in Bangkok. And this is a railway operations center infected by WannaCry. In United Kingdom, we saw some of the biggest effects because NHS, their National Health Service, was hit. And this resulted in 19,500 medical appointments to be cancelled. 19,500. Ambulance cars were diverted to other hospitals or were backed up on the yards of hospitals because of a piece of malware. We actually looked at death statistics in the United Kingdom afterwards, just to compare if there were more deaths during the WannaCry week. We couldn't see any major difference, so it probably didn't cause anything like that. But this was a very big deal indeed. And it was an even bigger outlier when we realized the source. WannaCry was not written by an organized crime gang. It was written by a government, the North Korean government. Governments use offensive cyber power for espionage and for sabotage. They use it for spying or for sabotage or maybe for waging war, with one exception, and that exception is North Korea. North Korea is the only government in the world which has been trying to make money with ransomware. Making money with ransomware to fix your budget deficit sounds pretty outlandish, but that's exactly what they were trying to do here. So the NSA exploit, stolen by an NSA external employee, Mr. Harold Martin, was then shared with the Russians who leaked it, and it ended up with North Korea, who used it against US citizens. Pretty wild case. Did North Korea make any money? No, not really. This was the first ransomware they ever tried. Of course, as we know, North Korea has tried making money many other ways, mostly by hacking into international banking networks and into cryptocurrency exchanges, including the largest theft in history, the Axie Infinity cryptocurrency heist, which netted them $625 million. That's a big amount of money. But WannaCry was a failure. It was, like I said, the first attempt, so they didn't have a leak site. They had no secure communication mechanism. It would show you a Bitcoin address, send money here, and then email us, and we will unencrypt your files. They had an email address. That's the way you were supposed to contact them to get your files back. And the operator shut down the email address during the first hours of the outbreak. So they had no way of communicating with the victims, which means the victims didn't get their files back. 6 weeks later, we find NotPetya. This is a year after Petya, and NotPetya and Petya look exactly the same. Petya was written by a crime gang. NotPetya was written by GRU, the Russian military intelligence, and they made it look like Petya, but it wasn't Petya. That's why we call it NotPetya. During the first hours, all assumed that this is Petya because it looked the same. It shows the same ransom note. But this wasn't ransomware at all. When NotPetya hits your computer, it reboots it and shows this check disk display. And during this display, it's not encrypting your files, it's wiping your files. So it looks like ransomware, has a ransom note, but the files haven't been encrypted. The files have been wiped. Ransomware is a cover story. This is a weapon. This is a cyber weapon which claims to be ransomware. There is no way of recovering your files. It shows you onion addresses, it gives you ways of paying. All of that is just masquerade. This is Russian military attacking Ukraine with a cyber weapon.
It is known as the Petya virus, and it has impacted numerous businesses in Europe, including banks, energy companies, telecom operators, retailers, even government agencies. Maersk, the largest shipping container line, reported on Twitter that its computer systems are down.
The way Russia was targeting Ukraine with this cyber weapon was through a Ukrainian software company. They broke into a software company developing a piece of software called MEDOC or MEDOC, and then sent an extra update through the update mechanism to all the clients and customers who were running this financial software. That software is only used in Ukraine. It's Ukrainian. So how did it then end up all the way to companies like Maersk and Maersk, which are not Ukrainian at all? Well, companies that work around the world have offices in Ukraine. For example, Maersk, the shipping company, did have an office in Kyiv. And the people who were working in the Kyiv office, well, they were sharing the same network with the rest of this company. Maersk became the most visible victim for this attack. NotPetya is one of the largest outbreaks in history, one of the most damaging outbreaks in history. Now, I know Andy, who was the CISO at Maersk at the time, and he's told me about what it felt like. How did the things go down when they realized that their network has been hit by what we later started to know as NotPetya? It took 15 minutes for them to lose their network. 15 minutes they lost all visibility. They no longer had any idea what's happening. They had no idea whether their piers or harbors they're operating around the world are operational, whether their data centers are up or down. Anything they could see had been destroyed. At some stage, Andy and his team were wondering if this is the whole world. Have all computers on the planet been wiped? Because everything they could see had been wiped. And then Andy told me he looked out the window and he saw people walking into grocery stores and walking out carrying groceries. So he realized that it's not the whole world. I mean, that's how blind you are when you are in the middle of this. And the thing he also told me was about the shock. The shock of getting hit by something like this. It's very hard to work when you're in the middle of a shock. It's very hard to work when the computers around you are crashing, because you are in a state of shock. Is everybody awake? It's hard to work when your computers are crashing. It's hard to work when you are in a state of shock. And this is the reason why we should be testing our systems. Testing how we can work when we are in the middle of a complete shock. When suddenly we cannot see what's happening in our networks. When suddenly you have no longer access to email or Teams or the phone list in your phone. The phone book is empty because it's synchronized from AD and AD has been crashed. This is why doing tabletop exercises and rehearsing beforehand is such a great idea. You get some sense of a feeling what it feels like when you are working blind or you're working while you're shocked. And the reason why the rest of the ransomware industry suffered so badly from WannaCry and NotPetya was that these were the two largest ransomware cases in history, and paying the ransom didn't work. This is exactly what the ransomware gangs were trying to avoid. They wanted to build this reputation that paying works, and in the two largest cases, it didn't. A year later, we started finding ransomware as a service attacks. This was pioneered by GandCrab, which later evolved into REvil. And we also saw ransomware as a service mechanisms deployed by hacktivist groups like GhostSec.
Are you looking for a ready-made ransomware with 100% reliability, but lack the resources to build it on your own? Are you looking for a reliable service with better commission fees after compromising the organization? Then you've come to the right place. Introducing GhostLocker.
There you go. Online ads for ransomware as a service. Starting to build up the affiliate model where you have an operator who's built the ransomware, who has the onion sites, the leak sites, the payment mechanisms, and then affiliates, outsiders, can just join in and use these tools and get a cut of the ransom payment. A year later, the next big shift, double extortion. Groups were already running onion sites. That's how they're communicating with the victims to negotiate the ransom payment. But now they started to use the same sites to leak the files stolen from the victims. companies were waking up to to improving their backup systems. Ransomware was big news. Companies were learning that, making sure our backups actually work is a good idea. Another big lesson was that in many cases, restoring and recovering from your backups might be surprisingly slow. In some cases, it might take weeks, and you might not have the time to wait for weeks. So companies started testing the restoring and recovery process better, which means you didn't need to pay. If you had good backups of everything you could recover overnight, why pay? That's why Maze pioneered the idea of double extortion. Not only encrypt the files, but steal files. If you don't pay, your files will be leaked. And these gangs also started to get much better in figuring out how much money they should be asking for from the victims. There's a great online resource called Ransom Chat, which lists the chat discussions between victims and the ransomware groups, where you can see what kind of negotiations previous victims have had with these gangs. And one thing which is interesting is to watch how they are haggling. Like, the victims are trying to negotiate the price down, and the attackers are trying to keep it up. And you see plenty of examples where the attackers know how much you can pay. They've stolen copies of your bookkeeping files. They know how much money you have in the bank, how much money your company has at its disposal, how many publicly traded stocks you have, which your company could sell overnight, or how many loans you have. And that completely changes the ransom negotiation when the other party knows how much money you have. Another thing we saw developing was that these ransomware gangs were hiring better. They were trying to get more professional people to join them. And I guess one of the most interesting details in this area were a couple of cases we saw where ransomware gangs were running front ends for fake companies, which were posing as legitimate pen testing companies, hiring pen testers. And if you believe this to be real, you would be hired for a completely remote position to do pen testing against clients of this company. It all looked real, except the client you were doing the pen test against hadn't ordered a pen test. So this way, these gangs tried to recruit more professional attackers, hoping that they wouldn't be realizing that they're actually working for the enemy. I've been working in this field for 33 years, and I've been keeping tabs on how many companies actually go bankrupt, fail, fold after getting hacked. And that list is surprisingly small. Even with the worst cases, companies, they typically do recover. Not everybody recovers, but the list of companies which have gone bankrupt is surprisingly small, which is good news. Companies do recover. There are the exceptions. During the last couple of years, we've had several cases, for example, where medical systems or medical companies, private medical clinics have gone down. A couple of examples from here in the United States, and then another outlier case from my home country of Finland. In Finland, we had a private psychotherapy center called Vastaamo, the largest private psychotherapy center in our country, hacked in October 2020. This wasn't actually ransomware as itself. It was data theft, and then the company was blackmailed to pay a ransom, and when that failed, the attackers started blackmailing the individual patients. Pay me $500, or I will leak your private psychotherapy notes online. Highly unusual case, which actually had a sentence last week. The accused, Mr. Kivimäki, was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in jail. He's appealing this most likely, but that's right now where we are. This is a very fascinating case, and I was working closely with the case. And if you're interested in details, I actually go into details in my book, which is called If It's Smart, It's Vulnerable. The chapter for the Vastaamo incident and my notes about the whole case is actually available for free download on the website for the book, which is ifitsmartitsvulnerable.com. If you're interested in the case, you can just download the PDF from there. I will also be doing a book signing at 3 o'clock today if you're interested in the book itself. Here in the United States, the two largest, most high-profile cases were the Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods incidents we saw 3 years ago. And that was the work of REvil, known also as Evil Corp. Here in the center, Maxim Yakubets in his Lambo, on his both sides, his arms sergeants in their Audis. The big boss gets the Lambo, the sergeants get the Audis. That's the way it works.
Terrible timing, quite frankly, for something like this. And it does highlight, as Jim has reported extensively, kind of the weakness in cybersecurity or cyber infrastructure to cyber warfare in this country, no question.
Listen, virtually every week, right, you have a reminder of that. What systems, both government and private, are vulnerable, and here is another one. Christine Romans, thanks very much.
May 2021, Colonial Pipeline, the second largest oil and gas network in the United States. Also May 2021, JBS Foods, the largest meat producer on the planet. And this woke up the people here in the United States at the highest level.
I talked about the proposition that certain critical infrastructure should be off limits to attack, period, by cyber or any other means. I gave them a list. If I'm not mistaken, I don't have it in front of me, 16 specific entities, 16 defined as critical infrastructure under U.S. policy, from the energy sector to our water systems. Of course, the principle is one thing. It has to be backed up by practice. Responsible countries need to take action against criminals who conduct ransomware activities on their territory.
Responsible countries have to take action against criminals who conduct ransomware operations in their territory. I agree. So what did US do? Well, they started putting indictments for Russian cybercriminals, including REvil, and they started putting out bounties on the heads of the leaders. USA has this Reward for Justice program, so they started ordering 10 million bounties for information leading to arrests of the largest ransomware gangs. 10 million and most likely immunity from prosecution if you rat your friends. You very quickly realize that if I don't rat my friends, then they will rat me, so I should move first. And this works. It's also interesting to see the money figures here. $10 million is the same amount of money the Rewards for Justice program is offering for terrorist leaders, like leaders of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And this worked, and we started seeing arrests. That's one of the REvil affiliates getting arrested in fall 2021. That's a picture from a month ago. REvil affiliates getting sentenced in Russia. So Russian law enforcement taking action against Russian criminals. We saw arrests elsewhere as well. Now pay attention as law enforcement is entering this compound, especially how they carry a master key to get in. Did you see the key? Right here. That's what it looks like. That's how you get in. Well, these cases, they looked good. We had success with international law enforcement, including law enforcement in Russia. The biggest hit these operations got was in February 24, 2022, as Russia invaded Ukraine again. And the cooperation pretty much stalled. But the ruthless attack from Russia against Ukraine also caused the undoing of the largest ransomware gang at the time, Conti. Conti was an international group, mostly consisting of Russian citizens, and when the invasion started, they posted on their site that they support Russia in this conflict, well, in this war on Ukraine. Maybe the team leaders didn't realize, but some of the team members were not Russian, they were Ukrainian. And one team member started leaking information about the operation on Twitter, including contact information, email addresses, pictures of the team members. And we learned a lot about how a group like this works from the leaks. These leaks are very valuable to researchers. We learned about their organizational structure, about the salaries they pay, about the physical offices they operate, about the fact that they have an HR department. They pay salaries twice a month. They have their own data centers. They have their own IT team. Organized crime. That's what it is. Then we had more law enforcement action, including the spectacular success of US law enforcement gaining access into the Hive back-end control panel.
Last July, FBI Tampa gained clandestine, persistent access to Hive's control panel. And since then, for the past 7 months, we've been able to exploit that access to help victims while keeping Hive in the dark, using that access to identify Hive's victims and to offer over 1,300 victims around the world keys to decrypt their infected networks, preventing at least $130 million in ransom payments and cutting off the gas that's fueling Hive's fire.
US law enforcement managed to sign up as an affiliate for Hive, and they had access to the control panel, which you could use to generate the keys to decrypt the files. So they generated the keys for thousands of victims. Very clever, very nice move. Hive never recovered from this law enforcement action. One of the individuals which was linked to both Hive but also to Lockbit was this guy, Mikhail Matveev, known also as Vasavaka, known online pretty well from the fact that he only has 4 fingers in one of his hands. He was indicted last year. How did he react? Well, this guy at the time was active in Twitter, so he posted a message on Twitter saying cuckoo, and then an image of a T-shirt he had printed which had his indictment on the T-shirt. And then he later posted a message to US law enforcement wishing US law enforcement happy hunting. That's the last post he was done. So this guy was involved with both Hive and Lockbit. And Lockbit has had more individual victims than any other ransomware gang in history. Thousands of victims. We know that more than 2,000 victims have started negotiations with Lockbit on their ransom chat channel. Simply scrolling through the Lockbit leak site is eye-opening because the list never ends. There's more victims, more and more companies all over the world. You can just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. You'll see companies from all possible industry areas, of all sizes, from all over the world. And that's a great eye-opener for companies that might think that, we're not interesting, we're not very visible. Why would anybody attack us with ransomware? Then when you look at these victims, you realize that you're just like these. I mean, some of these companies are completely unknown, small, medium-sized companies in some faraway country, yet they got hit. Right next to each other, you have a furniture maker from Copenhagen. Then you have a steel mill from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Then you have a bank from Vancouver. It's like somebody would have shot on the internet with a shotgun, hitting random targets. Because that's pretty much what it is. These gangs are just using an exploit. They don't care who the victim is. If you are vulnerable, you will get hit. Lockbit has now been targeted by law enforcement with the Operation Kronos. This started in February. They managed to take down the leak site, and they are investigating the individual affiliates. This law enforcement action is the combination of 11 different countries working together. Lockbit has recovered in the sense that they've set up a new leak site. In fact, they posted 12 new victims on the leak site yesterday. But the big news that we got yesterday morning was that the leader of the gang, guy who was known online as Lockbit Sup, his identity was uncovered by the British National High-Tech Crime Unit yesterday morning. We now know that the leader of the gang is Mr. Dmitry Korosev. And by the way, Alan Liska from Recorded Future actually printed stickers of this indictment, and he's handing them out here at RSA. So if you want a sticker of this, find Alan. Other big news over the last couple of days have been the United Health hearing here in the United States. Massive case in scale and scope and the amount of money involved, and the fact that a very large part of US citizens have their data exposed in this particular hack. This one was done by Alpha, another gang which has been targeted by law enforcement just recently. And even though United Health paid the ransom, $22 million, they didn't recover through help from the gang because one of the Alpha leaders did an exit scam. He took the 22 million payment and just ran away instead of sharing it with the affiliate who had actually done the hack, which means the affiliate then is reselling the stolen information on other forums. So another case where paying the ransom didn't work. Ransom gangs try to maintain the reputation that paying works, but as we've seen, it always doesn't work. The basic mechanism how almost all of these cases work is pretty much always the same. The attackers get in by stolen credentials, by phishing, by a remote exploit. Then once they're in, they attack by building persistency so they can stay in even if you find them. They escalate privileges. They try to find their way into all of your systems, especially your backup systems. So then they can exfiltrate data, destroy your backups, encrypt the files. That's the logic in almost all of the cases. So what does it mean for the future? What about the next decade? We've now been fighting this problem for 10 years, and I think we will be fighting it for many decades to come. I don't see this ending anytime soon. Ransomware attacks work. As long as someone pays the ransom, these groups will be operating. The percentage of companies that pay the ransom is going down, but the amount of companies that get hit is going up. And we see more and more newcomers entering this field, young hackers who want to make the quick buck, and the quickest way they think they can make it is with ransomware. We haven't seen any interaction between artificial intelligence systems and ransomware gangs yet, but I guess we will be seeing full automation of ransomware campaigns, where they will automatically detect the defensive action taken by security companies and react automatically, maybe in seconds. That's fairly easy to do. That's likely to happen in the near future, but it hasn't happened yet. And the biggest failure we have is not being able to follow through with the indictments. There's plenty of law enforcement action where we know who the attackers are, but we cannot get them arrested or sentenced. And from your point of view, I guess the most important lesson is to understand that you can't hide. Even if you think you're not an interesting target, even if you think nobody can find you, that's not going to protect you. So we need to be able to secure our systems better. We need better updating and patching. We need better authentication. You have to have multi-factor everywhere. You need to test how long it takes to recover your backups. It's not enough to have backups. You have to test them. You can't do anything with backups which take a month to recover. You also need to think about how you compute. I know of several cases where when companies have been recovering from ransomware attacks, they haven't replaced their Windows laptops with new Windows laptops. They've actually gone to Chromebooks or to iPad Pros. Most end users working in your organizations could do their work fine with a Chromebook or with an iPad Pro. And it's pretty hard to infect those with ransomware. Then you need visibility in your network. You need to be able to manage your exposure, because you cannot manage what you can't measure. Fighting crime is nothing new. Even if you do become a victim of crime, you can rebuild. Victims of crime can rebuild. Victims of crime can recover. You can rebuild, and you can recover. Thank you very much.